With that, I believe I'm going to turn it over to our last session of the day. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Tomlinson, who will be guiding our last discussion and really talking about how folks that are part of our community of practice and supporters and implementers of the Data Usability Taking Root initiative are implementing this guidance in their day-to-day work. So thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Great, thanks, Lauren. I'm excited for this next session of Stories from the Frontline. I've got two good friends of mine, and Lisa Nelson from DirectTrust and Lauren Nixon from Clinical Architecture. They're going to talk a little bit about how some of the work that they're doing intersects and the way that data usability is something that they're actively involved in on a daily basis and what they're focused on and what they're working on. So they're going to talk a little bit about some of their experiences from the front lines, and we'll do a little bit of discussion and, of course, open to your questions throughout. But enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. Lisa, I believe we're kicking off with you.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm Lisa Nelson. I'm here today from DirectTrust, another community of practice that's really excited about some of the things that we're doing to help all this data usability guidance really take root. Laura and I are going to be talking about, just back one sec. We're going to be talking about two frameworks today. They're frameworks that help us as implementers and out in the field to be more effective, so that improving interoperability can really become something that's practically possible. Next slide now. Thanks. So what we really need is to improve a whole span of capability. It's not just creating and representing data in the right way with the right codes, but also being able to move it effectively so that it can be shared with others. And the two frameworks that we're going to be talking about today cover that. I'll be talking a little bit about a framework that's being developed at DirectTrust that helps us move the data with accurate, expected transactional payloads and useful metadata for classification of the information. Some of the things that Ricky Merrick was talking about earlier, this metadata that really drives use cases. And then the other that Laura's going to be talking about is giving us the ability to measure the quality of the data that's carried within each one of these message payloads in order for us to support continuous improvement, because we know this is like eating an elephant one bite at a time and something that we have to work on incrementally. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about the metadata and payload framework that we're working on at Direct. This is a framework that gives organizations the ability to rapidly define specific payloads with their metadata so that they can address more use cases more rapidly. The focus is really on defining a set of these transactional patterns that allow users to, without defining new kinds of documents or some of the component pieces that often are already in implementation guides developed by HL7, combine those types of documents into message payloads along with the right metadata so that it can really explain the information that's being delivered. And then create this in a reusable way so that these transaction patterns can rapidly drive other use cases, perhaps with different types of payloads, but rapidly allowing us to just really improve our capabilities on what we can share and exchange. So the framework just basically provides what I call interoperability recipe writing 101. It's a framework that just teaches people who are much closer to the need, not necessarily standards developers, but folks that can appreciate what needs to happen in a business sense. And it gives them the background to be able to write down what is the business case, the scenario, the actors that need to be transacting the information, and then what specifically needs to be in the message payload and the metadata that needs to accompany that. There's a chapter about how to address patient matching issues, and then how to map your metadata into the right use cases so that messages can be processed effectively. And there's even a piece that describes how to create a capability statement so that when your direct endpoint is published in a directory, you can describe the capabilities that are present. And Laura, do you want to tell us about the PIQI framework? Next slide,
Oh,
please.
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. I am so pleased to be here talking about this topic, especially with my friends Lisa and Andrew. We all are so into this topic and into moving the data usability guide forward. So my name's Laura Nixon. I serve as Vice President of Interoperability Solutions at Clinical Architecture. And my work focuses on advancing interoperability, data usability, and trusted exchange by bringing together healthcare organizations, HIEs, public health networks around shared strategies for data quality and semantic alignment. So Clinical Architecture is a healthcare data quality company that was founded in 2007 by clinicians, informaticists, and industry veterans. We partner with many of the nation's largest health systems, HIEs, payers, government agencies, as well as organizations like CDC and the Joint Commission to solve challenges around data quality and interoperability. In short, we help organizations move from data chaos to clarity by ensuring the information they rely on is complete, accurate, and interoperable, so you can reduce risk, improve outcomes, and build trust in the data that's being exchanged. One of our most exciting outcomes at Clinical Architecture is the Patient Information Quality Improvement Framework, or PIQI, as we pronounce it, that is designed to give us a standardized and portable way to measure the quality of patient information as it's exchanged. What makes PIQI unique is its focus. We're not looking at entire patient histories or warehouses of data. PIQI is applied to a single message in flight, whether that's a lab result, a clinical summary, a claim, an HL7V2 message, or a FHIR bundle. That is where the usability challenges live. It's at the point of exchange. So to do this, PIQI uses a simplified patient information model that focuses on just the essentials, like demographics, conditions, medications, labs, procedures, vital signs. So within that model, quality is assessed using what's called simple assessment modules, or SAMs, that are organized into evaluation rubrics that align with real-world use cases, including US CDI compliance. And this framework evaluates across 4 different dimensions. So the first one is availability. Is the data even present? The next one is accuracy. Is the data correct? Then we have conformity. Is the data in the expected format? And then finally, once you have all of those 3, you can then determine plausibility. Does it actually make sense clinically? That result is then both a 0 to 100 score that gives you a big picture view of the message quality itself. And then it's at the element level, pass-fail details that make it really transparent and actionable. It allows us to pinpoint problems quickly and, more importantly, to act on them. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, if you would. All right, so let's talk about why PIQI really matters. The reality is that 70% of patient records contain errors. That means poor data quality is obviously the norm, not an exception, and it creates risk, waste, mistrust, and in too many cases, it actually causes direct patient harm. So what PIQI provides is a portable, community-driven framework that can be applied across organizations and systems, no matter what technology stack they're using. It gives us an objectable, repeatable check that aren't subjective or one-off, and it produces actionable scoring, so then the problems can be identified and addressed at the source level. So the real impact actually comes from how PIQI closes the loop. It creates a feedback cycle: measure, fix, improve, remeasure. and it builds that accountability and confidence over time. So instead of treating data quality as an afterthought, it makes it a routine part of how your information flows. And that's really the shift we really need to make, because we don't need to just know that the data moved. We need to know that it's usable, that it can be trusted to support clinical decisions, that it can be trusted to meet reporting requirements or operational workflows. And PIQI turns the data usability guidance from theory into actual practice by showing not whether data just got from point A to point B, but whether it's fit for purpose when it actually arrives. Okay, Lisa, I think you're up next again.
I think so. Next slide, please. As we're talking about moving the data, that's why I wanted to talk about why this really matters to metadata and payloads. Because today, 90% of the patient information that's being shared out there is being shared through a few just a few simple transactions. And not every use case can really be supported well by just receiving a CCD. And that's like 90% of what's being shared today. Now, I don't know if you realize it or not, but direct messages are payload agnostic. They're ripe for being used to drive all types of use cases. And what this the metadata and payloads framework is really enabling us to do is giving us a rapid way to define very precisely what documents are needed for a use case, what information needs to be exchanged in a single transaction, and then what metadata needs to be present from that payload in the message itself, so that the message can be routed effectively, processed correctly, and really meet the intent of its purpose. So you're starting to see how these two things were just inherently perfect to work together. Messaging is really what fuels this feedback loop process that Laura was just telling you about. You move the data, and as you're moving it, you can measure the quality and then take action to fix what's not right, make some improvement, and then move it again and measure to see if things are getting better. This is really the kind of practical incremental approach that's needed to make it possible for us to start exchanging more of the right kinds of information to drive more types of use cases than what we're currently really leveraging today. So this is the kind of thing that could make the guidance that's in the Data Usability IG version 2 and version 1 more practical, because it gives us the tools we need and the power that we need to focus on these key data elements that need to be right, whether it's the data inside the message payload or it's the metadata that's telling us about that payload. This is what needs to be right in order for us to really get the power out of what's being exchanged, so that we can unpack it, route it, process it reliably. And the accuracy of that metadata is something that also could be measured. There's lots of instances today when documents are being exchanged that you think they're one thing, but they're really just a CCD inside. Or in the metadata, it says they're a CCD, but they're really not. And correspondence between the metadata and the payload itself is another thing that could be measured utilizing the PIQI framework. Next slide, please. Laura?
Yeah, exactly. So, Lisa, I feel like these two frameworks, like you keep saying, were built to work together. And I'm going to take just a little bit deeper look on how they connect, because as you said, this is really where they start adding value. So MAP defines the expectations. It tells us what documents and data should be included in the messages. It tells us how they should be packaged, what metadata should accompany them. So we're thinking of them as structure and rules for exchange, right? And then PIQI comes in to measure whether or not those expectations are actually being met in real practice. So back to your analogy earlier, if MAP defines the recipe, then PIQI is the taste test. So one without the other leaves you completely exposed, right? The recipe alone does not guarantee that the meal is edible. A taste test alone doesn't mean that it's guaranteed that it's consistent every time. Together, you get both structure and accountability. So in the real world application, this combined approach really fuels that whole continuous improvement loop that we're going for. Move, measure, fix, improve, move again. So that means that organizations can onboard new data sources with confidence. They can monitor ongoing feeds for quality drift over time. They can validate compliance with standards like USCDI and DUIG. And then we can also report really transparently and consistently to executives, payers, regulators. So it's not just about checking that box for compliance. It's about building a system where improvement becomes a part of your actual normal everyday workflow. And that's when we make improvement routine. That's when we start closing that gap on trust in data. So because ultimately the last barrier to true interoperability isn't just about whether, again, the data moves from point to point. It's about whether the people receiving it trust it enough to use it. So these frameworks together are designed to close that gap and create that trust. Next slide.
So as we were working together to put together this presentation, we had some great ideas about being able to demonstrate these two frameworks working together. And we couldn't do it all just today, but I think you guys should stay tuned. We'll have a lot more to say about being able to demonstrate this. But we wanted to at least give you a picture, a couple of pictures to allow you to see what it is that we're talking about. So on the right-hand side of the picture, labeled PIQI, is an open source server that is delivering the capabilities that Laura was describing. And what the PIQI server takes as input are these rubric rules that are designed knowing about the payloads, the message payloads that are going to be tested. And so there's a format that the information is flattened into, which can be fed into that server, along with a little bit of information about the provider and the source, so that ultimately the report that comes out of the server can be returned to the right recipient. Designed with a really simple framework. If I put in 10 rules, each rule is worth 10 points. And if, based on how you score, you get a 100 or a 90, it's a nice, simple report that allows you to think about it like you would a test in school, with a score from 0 to 100. If you consider how this would work with the metadata and payloads framework, I wanted to show you, please, on the next slide, how we imagine this is going to be tested. When you start out with a direct message, understanding by the metadata and payloads framework what the payload is supposed to carry, each of those pieces, whether it's FHIR items, resources in a collection bundle, CDA documents, or some sort of ADT message like an event notification. Those individual pieces that are fit for a particular use case can be teased apart, and each of them flattened into the PIQI model, along with the message itself, with the metadata that it contains. And even if narrative is part of the recipe of what's required, we can make sure that the narrative information is also included. So the PIQI formats are then tested through a call to that server, an API call to the PIQI server. And with Direct, we have 4 amazing potential spots where this kind of testing could be done. The message sender, who might be interested in producing high quality because maybe they get better compensation for higher quality data, or maybe they're concerned about their risk and liability, and so they want to make sure that their documents that are sending out are of high quality. They could be choosing to do this themselves. Or the message receivers who might want to be very certain that the data that's coming in is really fit for purpose for a particular use case. But we also have these HISP organizations that are at the core of the DirectTrust network who could offer quality assessment services to help measure the quality of information that flows through their systems, because they play a special role in encoding and decoding these messages that travel securely through the internet. And so there's really 4 possible spots where we could really be taking advantage and applying this kind of quality measurement to our work in the field. Now let's talk about these rubric packages. This is a place where I think if you think smart, start with the end in mind. When we're devising the recipe for these messages, we could be inventing the rubrics at the same time. And just like now, all of the work that's being done with US CDI that gets expressed in CCDA and in US Core through the HL7 specifications, the time to think about the rules of measuring quality is really at the very beginning. And if that's done, then standardized rubrics can be made available so that organizations can, basically feed those quality measurement gears right into the PIQI server and have this work in a consistent way for many, many players. And then you've got your assessment score that comes out the other side that can be delivered to the right people who can take action about improvement plans to make things better over time. So that's really what we're thinking of. I had the opportunity to work with Charlie Harp at the Fire Connect-a-thon this 2 weekends ago, and we're already thinking about it in the context of moving event notification information via direct. And so stay tuned, and I think that we'll be able to share more information with some examples so that the community here can really see how these 2 frameworks work together. Next slide.
All right. Well, this slide really highlights what the real barrier is we all are working to overcome, and it's trust. It's not always enough for data to be simply moved from point A to point B. It's enough that we need to know if we can trust it when it arrives. So, Andrew, I think you may have a couple of questions for us.
Yeah, I do. That was such a great overview. Thank you. I know we have a couple scripted questions, but before we dive into those, we do have one question from the chat, which is just a baseline question. I think it'll be helpful for our structure. That's asking just for a basic understanding of when you talk about what's in a payload, what's in it? What is a payload of information that's being sent? What are you thinking about when you're using that word?
Yeah, thank you. So just like the payload of a locomotive, a train that's carrying, coal or containers that come from ships with goods inside, the payload is the aspect or the information that's inside the message. And with a direct message, often those payloads are organized according to a standard that's called XDM or XDR. And these are the early IHE protocols that gave us a packing label called a submission set and individual packing boxes called document entries. And inside that, you can pack CDA documents, V2 messages, fire resources. You can really package anything that's needed. It could be an Excel sheet. It could be a Word document. The metadata and payloads framework describes all of the different possible things that you could package in there. Could be a PDF document. You basically take a look at your use case and figure out who needs to send what information to whom, and then what information do they need to send back. And based on that analysis, you establish your packing boxes and what documents would be inside there. And that refers really the set of documents plus the packing label is what we're talking about when we talk about the payload.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that's a good level set for those that are just getting in that. Please keep submitting questions if you're in the audience. We'd love to have Laura and Lisa tackle them. But while they're doing that, when we think about that marriage, you talked a little bit about it between direct messaging, the PIQI framework, and the implementation guide that we just got an overview from a little while ago. How important are the processes in practice, such as the data capture and the accurate data coding? How important is that to kind of having this whole process work appropriately?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Sure.
I would say that it's absolutely critical, because despite all of these frameworks, whether it's direct or PIQI or the data usability implementation guide, they're only as strong as the data that flows through them. So you can have the best standards in the world, but if what's being captured at the point of care is inconsistent or incomplete or coded incorrectly, then that usability problem is already baked in before the data is even moving, right? So you're already creating the catastrophic failure before it's even moved from point A to point B. So, I mean, I think we've said, PIQI makes those issues visible. It doesn't just tell you if it was delivered, it tells you whether or not the content inside was present, accurate, formatted correctly, and clinically plausible. But that doesn't replace the need for good capture practices. It complements them by creating a feedback loop. So if you're consistently seeing coding that's errored out or missing flags or missing values that are flagged, then it points upstream to processes that really need to be changed. That's that root cause analysis. So to me, I think the marriage is really about alignment. So standards like the DUIG define expectations, and then direct provides the pipes, and then PIQI provides the measurement. But without attention to all of the basics of data capture and coding, you're always going to be fighting that battle uphill on usability.
Lisa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, really, for troubleshooting problems that happen in the field, being able to have a tool that makes transparent where the issues are and where the quality problems are being introduced would be so valuable. And when you're trying to just peel the onion in terms of working at it layer by layer, without these tools, sometimes troubleshooting, where Catherine Lusk and I are working on a problem, just trying to get an antepartum summary from the place where a mom gets her prenatal care to the hospital where she's going to deliver the baby. And we have teams of people on the phone responsible for everything, both edges and the pipes in the middle, trying to figure out why we can't find the documents that are supposedly leaving one place and arriving at the other, but the humans can't figure out where they've gone. And if you had a report that could assess some tests based on, are the document codes being populated correctly? Is the author being populated correctly? And is the title or the date of creation being populated correctly? 4 or 5 simple tests like that would be able to help that group of people really rapidly figure out what they're doing wrong and how that they could work more effectively together.
That's a perfect segue into the next question I kind of want to ask you about is, Lisa, maybe we can start with you on this. You talked about this point of being able to test what you have and being able to understand what data and what information is flowing through there. I mean, what has the journey as a whole been like for PIQI or metadata payloads, or any of the work that we've talked about today, from where we started not that long ago, which was basically nothing, and where you're hoping that we're going to be going in the next few years?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. We got started trying to figure out how to more effectively move event notifications out to organizations that didn't have stacks to process HL7 V2 messages. And so that we could improve care by being able to get this important notification information out to the right folks. And in the process of doing that, it took us quite some time to write that first implementation guide. But what we learned is that the patterns that we were establishing and figuring out were absolutely generalizable to any other use case and other types of payloads that we wanted to move. And so what started as a single attempt to do one thing turned into something absolutely generalizable to be able to help in so many other ways. And that's really what allowed us to go from sort of nothing to something much bigger, was working on one use case and then taking the look back to say, how do we generalize what we've learned, and how do we leverage it to reach greater scale?
Laura, what about for you?
Yeah, I think that that can be said with the PIQI framework as well. So when Charlie got started with developing the PIQI framework, there was nothing really in place that was applicable across all message formats. There was nothing really there that could truly measure data in motion. We had standards for transport. We had some guidance for what good data looked like, but we didn't really have a consistent or repeatable way of checking that across message types and across exchange frameworks. So I think that that was truly the origin of PIQI. Charlie and team wanted to create this portable, community-driven framework that could sit on top of different exchange environments and create transparency. So it's about scale and adoption at this point. So the more we talk about it, the more we educate our community on it, the more we can encourage people to join in the community of practice with Sequoia Project, with with our DirectTrust partners, with the clinical architecture and the PIQI Alliance. These are the type of things that really push that adoption and that scale across our ecosystem, because we are all here with one goal in mind, right? That's to create better outcomes for patients and for communities. And I feel like, you know, with that drive in mind, coming together to make sure the data that's being exchanged across these pipes is good and consistent, repeatable, and transparent, that just serves our community at whole.
We've talked a lot about starting on things or getting started. I know we only have a couple minutes left in our session, but I think this is such a good question. I'd love to get answers from both of you quickly on this. That if you're coming to this conversation, maybe this is your first time engaging in a data usability conversation, or your first time hearing about PIQI or the work that you're doing, Lisa, both at DirectTrust and you've done for a long time on metadata payloads. How should someone begin to even get involved in this work? Where should they look to turn if they're a novice? How do they even start thinking about this?
I
Sure.
thought about this a little bit, Andrew, when you mentioned, what kind of advice we might be able to give the audience today. And I definitely think that finding a use case that's really valuable to your organization and something maybe that you're even passionate about, and get involved with that as your focus. You can take all of this other guidance and just narrow it to be about your particular use case. And then it's not so overwhelming. You don't have to maybe try and figure out how to fix every lab code. You just need to, work on how do you get the right lab codes for your use case, or not all pieces of metadata. But if you know that your organization or your particular use case needs to be able to exchange these one or two types of documents, focus on the metadata that needs to be available for those, and just apply this in a small but valuable place. And I think that that's a great way to get a lot of leverage out of it.
Laura?
Lisa, that's hilarious, because it's literally what I wrote down too. That's so funny. You're like saying it like word for word, like, oh my God. No, truly, that's exactly what I was thinking. Going back to eating the elephant one bite at a time. My dad told me that a long time ago, and that has stuck. But it's truly, what is the way to get to the end? It's by taking small, consistent steps. You know, we're not overcomplicating things. We're looking for something that matters to us, that will produce tangible results that matter to our stakeholders. And so if you do that, you can connect it to tangible problems and get truly quick wins that create that value for your entire community. And another thing that I would say is just lean in on community, right? Because none of us are solving these problems alone. And that's what makes PIQI and MAP so powerful, is that they're not proprietary. They're designed to be portable. They're designed to be shared. They're engaging with the Taking Root initiative is with Sequoia, with peers. These are people that are already experimenting with these frameworks. They're already putting them into practice. So rather than starting over, reinventing the wheel, take their experience by, you know, joining these communities of practice and then applying them to your organization in a way that's meaningful, valuable, and efficient too. So that's just my, that's mine. So in short, start small, real, and then
Framework.
don't be afraid to lean in on the hard. So yeah.
I think they're frameworks like that picture we showed you of the bridge. Like they're frameworks that help you get across this quality chasm that we've been trying to cross for so many years.
Yep.
Well, Lisa, Laura, this has been great. I think it's really important to ground the work that's happening into real world applications to be able to understand how exactly we're seeing this flow. So I want to thank you both for taking time to talk with us today. I look forward to continue engaging with both of you as we move forward on the Taking Root work, and I'm sure we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone.